Thank you very much for taking the time and trouble to come here this evening. In what we are hoping will become an annual keynote address, Rocky Mountain has invited one of the great and good of our industry. And in this instance, we've got one of the greatest and best, someone who I think it's fair to say, without his influence, we wouldn't have a high-end industry. It's both an honor and a pleasure to welcome Harry Pearson.
Thank you, guys. I'm going to sit down during this tonight. I fell plague to the dehydration complex of Denver. I've never been this high on natural stuff before. And they warned me, drink plenty of water. And so I've been going like a house ablaze for 2 days, and all of a sudden I'm in the middle of the atrium, no Jack Daniels at hand or anything, and what happens? I feel faint. So this lady says, let me get you some water. And I said, okay. And she gets me water and said, I know that you're dehydrated. And she said, I went through this once. And I said, yeah, what happened? She said, well, I went to see Dick Cheney, and I fainted right in front of him. And I said, well, I would faint in front of him too, but not for the reason you did. What I want to do, guys, is I want to talk about past a bit and where we were, how we got to here and what we accomplished, and then we go to the transition. And the transition is the most important thing I think I can talk about, and it's the thing we'll argue about. How do we get to the future? And we'll take questions, obviously, about halfway through. And if anybody starts preaching like somebody did yesterday, okay? That like that. Well, all right. Okay, first of all, there are two reasons I'm here, or started me on my road here. One of them was Gordon Holt. And if you haven't heard, there's a cocktail party for Gordon right after this that B. Lamb is throwing where?
Up on the peak level outside the hospital.
And it's a martini party. And I get to have a chocolate martini, okay? But Gordon was the guy I used to read when I was in high school. I first read him in all the magazines. He wrote for what was called then Stereo Review, before it became Hi-Fi Review. Then it became Hi-Fi Stereo Review. Then it became Stereo Review. And then surprisingly, they came with this title, Sound and Vision. Couldn't imagine where they got it from. But, and he and Julian Hirsch were in the same issue a lot of times. Then he went to High Fidelity, which was then High Fidelity. And he reviewed the KLH Model 9s. And the son of the guy who did it is here, David Jansen. And he's got a room upstairs with his new electrostatics, which you might want to hear. I reviewed them. He's not here to pay me for this, is he? No? Okay. And what Gordon did was he ran a full review on the KLH Model 9, and he said it was one of the best speakers he ever heard, and he loved it. Well, High Fidelity's advertisers got angry. How can he review our speaker if he says this is the best? So Gordon quit. And what Gordon did after a while was set up an alternative magazine. They called it Underground then, but it was really alternative. It was an answer to what was there. And it was where all of us who got sick and tired of the commercial magazines went to read to find out what it really sounded like. Because the commercial magazines would give you the measurements. And they say, but the measurements are essentially perfect. So we'll talk about how many knobs it has, how many lights it has, and on and on and on. And you'd never hear how it sounded. And Gordon started working on a vocabulary. And he came up with some of the basic terms like transparency, so on and so forth, and started like the matrix. For me, it was the matrix because I could build on that. The other person was Wilma Cozart, Wilma Cozart Fine, who just died a week ago Monday. After a 2-year illness. And I have been assigned to do a piece on her, and so I've been looking into Wilma, doing an in search of Wilma Cozart. But you know what she did? She told me the first time we met, when I lured her out of retirement, and I really did. She said, trust your ears. Said, if the techno freaks come down, like, say, from the mountain at Framingham, and say, this is how it's supposed to sound, we have the measurement, and it doesn't sound like, don't believe them. No matter what people tell you about the measurements, don't believe it if you don't trust your ears. And why do you trust your ears? Because you love music, and she did. She worked for the Dallas Symphony under Antal Dorati, went with him to Minneapolis, and then went to Mercury, where she met the guy she was going to marry, who was the best engineer in the business, Bob Fine. And you think about her, all the records they put out, they never put out a really bad sounding one. Think about it. Even RCA put out bad sounding ones. They have the best sonic record of any company. You know why? The simplest technique. One mic for mono at the focal point of the hall. For stereo, they added 2 more mics to the side on that focal point plane. And you can listen to their records today, and there was no jiggering with the sound or anything. So she lives on right now. And she put the passion of the music first. So if you guys aren't here because you love the music, you're in the wrong business. I saw audio when I started. I grew up in the mountains of North Carolina, and we didn't have any music. So I used to get records, which I could promptly break, of course. And I had this mad passion for music. And when I first heard my first hi-fi system, I realized how much music I'd been missing by listening to the players of the time. And I suddenly decided to pursue this because I wanted to get into the music, not into the equipment. Audio equipment is simply a vehicle to get you to the music. And if it doesn't do that, if it's high definition or hi-fi, and it doesn't give you a sense of music, it's not really good. And that goes back to trust your ears. What do? You listen to real music, you go to concerts, you support musicians, you do. And then when you do that, you can judge anything. If a viola sounds like a cello, wrong. If the lower thing of a cello sounds like a string bass, wrong. If a flute sounds like a piccolo, wrong. And if you know these things, nobody can fool you. So those are the first 2 things that started me out. And I think I defined the term high-end. And I used it the first time anywhere. And now I read the magazines and I find that they're high-end dildos. There are. There was another thing I think my magazine did, which people kept saying, how do I know what is a good sounding record? So I created a super disc list. And what I did was create a super disc market for super disc, and the prices became super prices. And in 1985, my house almost burned down, and a lot of my records were destroyed. And guess what? Guess who couldn't afford to replace the records that he was using as reference? The rich irony of this is I created it, and then it ate me. But those records today, and especially the Mercurys, and some of the RCAs, still you can use as reference. And the more minimally mic'd they are, the truer they are. And it really is true. These days, you have so many microphones that the flute is louder than the trumpet. Not right. Perspective. You want a sense of space. That's what Bob Fine did. Space. You've got to have the space of the music. You've got to have the depth. And he had the soundstage concept, which I read about on the back of Mercury's. And when I first heard a soundstage, was what I call the QRS-1D, or the Infinity IRS, I realized that you're supposed to create an entire width of the orchestra. And when we first started this back then, every speaker had fridges and beveled edges. And so they didn't create any space. You had to get rid of all the distractions to create, And I had this guy from somewhere overseas, Asia, who kept saying, the 2 microphones are like this. You can't have space. I said, microphones aren't like eyes. They have wide angles. When he write me every week. I don't hear the width. I said, we'll get some good equipment. I have to tell you one more thing to get a transition point. We went from measurement-oriented reviews, and this is what made all of us radical then, all of us underground people, to observationally oriented reviews. In other words, we reported on what we heard. Now, there's a real difference between observation and subjective. And let me tell you what it is. Observation is what you heard and what you can describe. Subjective is what you can live with and like, because all things fail. Nothing is perfect. So if it doesn't quite have the dynamic range, but it's battery operated and it's pure and sweet, well, I can't argue with you. You have to decide, but you can't say, this is the best thing I've ever heard, without reference to an absolute sound and without reference to your own failings. So when I get subjective, it's because I say, I don't put this a value much on this, but this is what it sounds like no matter what value I put on it. And if you guys are reading good reviews and that's not in the review, it is not a good review. The reviewer should tell you what he hears, try to give you a sense of the character, and then you go listen for yourself. And you take your favorite records to the store or your favorite sources, and you hear. You don't take my word for it, because I can't tell you what you're going to like. I can tell you what I hear. And sometimes I'm right, and some manufacturers will tell you sometimes I'm not. Anyway, what happened in that time, and I have to tell you this, is that we eliminated many gross distortions in sound. If you remember what equipment sounded like back then, nothing was coherent. We had the bass driver, we had the cleaner, and we had things in between. But it was all coming out. You could listen to Dusty Springfield, the sax section of The Look of Love. You'd hear 3 saxes when it took that plunge. And I used to judge how the mid-bass was by that. Did it sound with one instrument? You hear a piano playing, you hear da da da, ding ding ding. It's coherency we didn't have then at all, or to speak of. The only time we did have it, interestingly enough, was with electrostatics. And the period of the great electrostatic thing was when we had something that would give us coherency and transparency. Unfortunately, getting electrostatics past that point was really almost impossible unless you made it as big as the side of the house, and then you couldn't drive it. There's another thing about electrostatics, but I think I won't pick on them today. We got rid of the gross colorations. We started doing dynamics. We learned that transistors did not give you depth at first, did not give you width. And then we found out something very interesting. We found out that transistors switch on and off. And the early transistors were audible in their switching on and off, whereas the tubes had a constant flow of electrons. And this led me to the concept of continuousness. And if music is continuous, when you go to a concert hall, it's not, it's all there. And I had a lot of trouble explaining continuousness to a lot of people, including myself. And one of my editors, Sally Reynolds, said, look, Harry, it's like a waterfall. It's constant. It flows. And if it flows, you begin to get it. And after 25 years, solid-state equipment is beginning to do that. But it takes a generation for any new technology to mature and to get good. Think about it. I mean, CDs right now are beginning to get good. I have some at home. They're still, well, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, what I see going on right now in the present is this. We have a whole bunch of ways to the future and a whole bunch of inventions going on. For example, there is the magnetic drive turntable. And if you have heard a magnetic drive turntable, it's very seductive because it's like riding in a car and you don't hear the wheels. So you don't hear any of that bass stuff that you take for granted in disc reproduction. And if it's not there, you hear bass like you hear off of a good CD. It really is wonderful if you can hear it. But as far as I know, there are only several turntables, and the clear audio statement, only $150,000. I'll take 2. But and then there was the Baron the Tim di Parravicini did a $20,000 one, but he can't produce very many of them. But I expect to see more. What we're working on really is extraneous noise. Battery-operated components are coming up. And last night I was talking, if any of you were here, I wasn't. I talked about Enid Lumley, who was one of my discoveries way back when. And Enid, 30 years ago, in the early issues of the magazine, started talking about power line interference. And everybody thought she was crazy. She hears power line interference? Huh. John Curl came to her defense and said she is well ahead of her time. So today I'm wandering around, and guess who I bump into? John Curl. And I won't tell you the first thing he said to me, but it was 2 words. I said, you'll have to stand in line at the back. Anyway, he's got a new amplifier out that's supposed to be very reasonably priced, but he told me Enid had died last year, and I didn't know this. She had lung cancer. For a long time, I thought she was like that character in Little Abner, Job of Philspick, because she always had this cloud, but it was cigarette smoke. She was the Marlboro woman. So I may have left the impression she was still alive. I'm sorry, she's gone. She gave up audio a long time ago. And that brings me to another point, just briefly, and I know there's some women in the audience tonight. We were the first magazine to hire women. As reviewers, our ad salesperson was the best in the business, Chris Ewing, who was here today. I guess she gave up. We hired women editors because there's this bias in this field against women. It's a subconscious bias, I believe. But women hear better than men generally because they protect their hearing in the 4 to 8 kilohertz region, which is where we blast it and destroy the cilia there, and then we have a notch loss. So we have to make it have high definition so we can hear it, we think. So we're going through right now a whole series of battery-operated electronics, and in many ways of doing it. Some are battery-operated, like I could go on and on, but what they do is they cut the power line out. And if you've heard the power line cut out, there's a kind of purity there. Now, the sacrifice they sometimes make is dynamics. Not always. But that's where the future is going. Now, there are other ways of doing that. There are devices that remove it. There's a whole slew of power conditioners out there with Teflon capacitors and everything. And let me tell you, they cost an arm, a leg, and some hair. And they're good with the Teflon caps. They really are. But there are all these strategies to get rid of the power line noise. Why? Because the power lines are getting worse and worse every year. Why? Because there's more and more use of them. At our house, we heard something in the system I didn't like, and Lou Johnson was there, so he said, let me put my oscilloscope on this. So he did, and we saw this jagged edge. So I walked out the house, down the street a little bit, and there was a buzzsaw going. And it fed right into the system. And at night, people say systems sound better at night. You know why? Less power use. So this is one of the things we're getting away from is power, and we have to learn how to describe it, because we are not working on our language, including myself in this. We have to have new terms. We have to have new definitions in order to do this. We really do. And we have to work harder, and we have to listen more critically. And we're relying too much, I think, on the old definitions. You know, oh, it's vanilla ice cream. I love it. The absolute sound is music. I don't know. And then the evolution of transistors. And one more thing. All of the component parts of electronics, resistors, capacitors, are so much better than they were 10, 15 years ago. It's unbelievable. When Macintosh got back into the tube business, they were delighted because they thought it was going to be, what's the tubes back then? We gave up tubes. We're solid state. We're modern. And they found out that they had all these wonderful resistors and capacitors that they never knew, and they were able to do the best tube stuff they've ever done. And they're still working on it. But it was a big surprise. Now, you guys who were doing tubes and other stuff before that knew that. But there's been an evolution that has not been much reported on because what does the public want to know about Mylar capacitors? And how many people can really explain it and what it means? And I'll tell you what the problem is, I think. We've lost our big technical writers, the good ones like Richard Heiser, the people who can explain the complicated stuff in language that you and I can understand. I am not a techno freak. I really have trouble understanding some of this. They start talking about square waves and jiggity waves and grandmother's waves and stuff, and I'm, oh, no. In any event, the future, briefly. We have the future right in front of us if we don't let these biases get us down. The dealer biases against women, the dealer biases against young people. What is the future? One of the parts of the future. How many of you guys have iPhones? Raise your hand. Go ahead. There are all sorts of devices now, computer-related, many. And what are we doing about that? We have millions of people, zillions of millions of people out there listening to music, really everywhere. Tons of them. And if we could take 1 or 2% of those people and convert them and inject them with audio fluid, we would be rich into the wild, wild future. Now, I'm going to ask Mike Mercer, who has written an article on this, to explain something he had in mind. And I'll tell you what it is. And he'll give you a little bit, and then I'll take the floor back, and then we'll go to questions. He wrote a piece for positive feedback. And what he said in this piece, and he'll explain it to you briefly, is that every high-end dealer should have a computer station. And that computer station should feed into a low-price system that some of us can afford, a slightly higher price system, which less of us can afford, and a big one, which nobody can afford. The idea here is to show this generation how much they're missing and to get them into high-end sound because you hear more of the music. You go ahead, tell them.
Well, I mean, you pretty much
stand up and speak to the audience, please. I have to say that.
Harry, you pretty much described what I said. But the crux of what I was saying is that, yes, we have now an unprecedented amount of people discovering, listening, sharing, finding out about new music more than we ever have. And what draws you into hi-fi? We're music lovers, right? I hope. So there's millions and millions of people out there like discovering new music through iTunes, through iPods. So I just suggested that dealers, this dealer that I worked for in Santa Rosa now did it, set up like you have your good, better, best scenarios, right? In your electronics, people walk in.
I'll do this now. Go ahead, sorry.
You have your entry level, your mid level, your high level. Encourage young people, old people, whoever it is. I'm not excluding anyone, but have them bring in their iPods and hook it up to decent systems that will reveal something, that will show them that music is also a sonic and a visceral experience, and it can be that through an iPod. You know, we all poo-poo MP3 and everything else. Well, you know what? We have a situation that we can take advantage of that's just, we've never had anything like it before. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I've never talked to as many people online and in person about new music or being turned on to new music, and that's what it's all about. So dealers have to follow suit. You know, the $10,000, $20,000, $30,000, $50,000 systems, awesome, great, keep selling them. What about the $300 and $500 speakers? An iPod can drive them too. It can drive it all. I don't know. I think we're missing out on a great opportunity.
So, thank you. And think about it, guys. If you don't have one in the store and you're a dealer, you're ignoring the potential audience. How are you going to get this group in? You're going to show them that more music. You are. Two more things I briefly want to get into, and then we'll do questions. I've almost forgot. One of the great breakthroughs is the high-resolution digital, and I mean DSD particularly, and I mean multi-channel sound. Why? Because multi-channel sound, if it's done right, will create an acoustic space that you can be inside of, and that will take you closer to the music. The problem with the early DSD recordings was that everybody said, oh gosh, we got highs, we got bass, and they didn't sell, and they don't know how to do the microphones either. But now they're learning. If you heard the latest generation of SACDs out there, you drop dead. I talked last night about John Adams' Transmigration of Souls at the 9/11 piece. Michael Bishop recorded that all the way around, so you can hear people walking and saying things to their loved ones, and you hear the orchestra. It will break your heart. And you can't get it if you don't hear it in multi-channel. And Beethoven's Fifth in multi-channel is a revelation, because you can hear how he scored it and why it was revolutionary. And you don't hear that in two-channel. You listen to organ music, it takes multi-channel to really show you the wave front and to feel it. So we are moving into a multi-channel era. And I just want to tell you that because I think that's another one of the transition points. Now, I think I've said enough for the moment. Roy?
Okay, thank you very much, Harry.
Hey, guys.
What we'll do is we'll take questions. When you ask a question, two things. One, would you please stand up so that the guys with the cameras can catch you? And would you speak up? Harry, you'll repeat the questions back so everyone gets to hear them.
I thought
two,
you were going to read the questions back.
I can repeat them back if you like.
Well, see, if you read the questions back, they can say, Harry's going deaf. Well, John Curl says that.
And the other thing, please try and keep your questions succinct and direct.
You can direct your questions at me, at Mercer, at each other. The point is to keep it short. so that we can have a discussion and involve everybody. And if some women do not stand up, I'm going to come and get them to stand up.
Okay, a first question, please.
Question?
Eric, when you're at home and you have a choice of you're relaxing, you're taking it easy, or you just really want to listen, are you going to put on a Living Presence record, or are you going to put on some digital?
So what the question is, for relaxation, are you listening to a Living Presence or a Living Stereo disc, or are you putting on something digital?
That's not a fair question to ask me. There are a couple of CDs in the last year that I can put on to listen to and use as evaluation. But give me the Mercuries, give me the RCAs, give me the EMIs, give me the Decas, give me my vinyl. I'll shoot it up for you. I want my vinyl.
Next question, please.
Oh, one more thing. Did you know that turntable sales increased 96% just last year? They've been going up every year. You know how all the young bands are using vinyl as prestige thing? Just keep that in mind. They keep pronouncing it dead. Go ahead.
This is your one chance. Would you like to stand up, sir?
Yes. Are you ever going to update your super disc list?
Is he ever going to update the super disc list?
I'm glad you asked that. Thank you. You know what? I've had trouble because there's not a lot of new super discs. Most of the stuff that I can get is from Classic, which is doing a brilliant job. Oh, one point, just briefly. Classic just discovered something called super clarity. They've discovered if you take the black stuff out of the record and make it like in the old days when it was transparent, that they took out magnetic material that affected the cartridge, and it sounds clearer and louder and better. But if all the new records I add I can find things, okay? And like I never heard Jackie Dupre doing Elgar's Cello Concerto in vinyl, but when I get a copy, I'll let you know. I would like to update it, and I will. And I'll revise it because what we're doing now is we're going through magnetic cartridge tests, and the cartridges and tone arms today are so good that I'm reordering some of my super discs because I'm discovering some that I liked before aren't as good as I thought, and some I didn't are. But I'm doing this update of the super SACD list. I know that won't make you happy, but I'm really happy about that. And then I'm going to also do an update of the super CD list. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, next question.
The absolute sound refers to live music performed in an actual acoustic space. So can there ever be absolute sound recordings of multi-channel, multi-mic recordings of rock and jazz?
Okay, so the term the absolute sound refers to acoustic music performed in a real space. So will there ever be multi-mic'd recordings of rock or jazz which qualify?
Absolutely. That's the reason. If it creates an ambient space. When you hear an SACD recording, you know what happens? It separates the instruments on the stage and gives you perspective and depth and row identification. Yes, the answer is yes, and it will be, but if you got to do it right.
If the vocalist is in a booth, if the drums are in a booth, if the bass is in a booth, if the bass is taken direct, can that be the absolute sound?
Well, you're asking me about the whole strategy of recording popular music. When I say you do the absolute sound, you have a reference standard. Popular music, they can do anything they want to, and some of these things are sort of interesting. And you can hear, like if you listen to Kind of Blue, Miles Davis in the multi-channel, you're not going to hear really great surround sound, but you're going to hear nuances in the playing, which is superb, that you won't hear in any two-channel version. Now, I don't know how to answer this. I personally think multi-micing too many popular things is not what I want to do at the end of the day. But sometimes it's really good. And you can't make an iron rule about these things, I don't think. Next question. Anybody?
Next question. Yes, sir?
Yes. I'd like to know, do you consider HDIM cables, do you consider those to be true high fidelity? And the second question is it time to bring back open reel recorders?
So is HDMI true high fidelity, and is it time to bring back open reel recorders?
No.
No.
Not yet.
Not yet.
If no one else has a question, oh, right, okay. You've gone already.
Okay, wait
We've got
a
one
second.
here.
Explain yourself.
One of the women, come on. Okay, stand up. Tell us something. Ask us something.
What is one recording that you can listen to over and over and over again? You could just appreciate it so much, and why?
A recording with lasting quality.
You know, with modern cartridges and a really good tone arm and the good record cleaning machines, you can make a record last almost indefinitely. You can.
What's your choice of music, though?
What?
What recording? What choice of music?
Do you have to ask that? You know, I've listened to Lieutenant Keegee so many times, I'm hearing the other side of the record. The Reiner recording. You know, this is really fun because what you do is I try to alternate. When I do my records and I do my cartridges, I pick out a whole bunch, and we sometimes are lucky enough to have multiple copies. And I try not to play them twice in a row. And I try to rotate it. That's like rotate it. I told you I had that. And I think that's what you have to do. If you really love your music and you're going to test it, you cannot listen to the same thing over and over and over again. But you give the grooves a chance to relax, and grooves do relax and can snap back into shape because they're vinyl. Answer.
Okay. Sir, please.
What do you see as the future for the CD in terms of downloading things these days? I mean, 10, 15 years, 20 years?
What's the lifespan on optical disc, I think is the question.
I don't know yet. That's one of the things we're finding out now. I have no idea. I've started playing with the wave disc, or about to. There are all these new things. I feel like almost I'm overwhelmed with new technologies, new strategies for getting music to us. I mean, I shouldn't say this, but I got one of Keith Johnson's recordings, the Rachmaninoff Symphonic Dances, on a wave file, and I could hear every microphone he used.
Sir at the back.
Yeah, I'm sorry, one last question. Harry, do you think you're ever going to have all that wonderful text again in your magazine like you used to have? I know it was a lot of work to write that much, but you know, back in the early days, you guys would have, I mean, it was like a book. You guys, your publications were like books.
Tell him to stop.
I was about to.
Go ahead, repeat it back for everybody.
So what he'd like to know is Harry ever going to be quite as productive as he used to be?
I was afraid. I couldn't hear that. My hearing is good. Look, you're almost putting me in a position that I have to talk about something I don't want to talk about, which is my present professional relationship. So just let me tell you this. Wait and see. And some of you guys might want to write for me, too.
One last question, which
One
I'm
last
gonna ask, if that's okay.
Okay, sure.
One last question. What's the single most important piece of equipment you've ever heard?
Single most important?
Yeah.
The most important? Well, I mean, that's not really fair. I mean, how do you say speakers versus turntables versus what? You want to say the best speaker I ever heard, I think, or do you want to say the best turntable? Obviously, it's going to be the clear audio. If you say the best single most important piece of equipment, does any one piece of equipment incorporate enough virtues for you to say this is truly revolutionary? I don't think so. You can have a revolutionary cartridge that will drive you crazy. I remember when I was a kid, I heard the Weathers FM cartridge and never heard anything that good for years and years and years again. And I would say that was revolutionary. I would have said the D150 at one point was revolutionary. I would have said Arnie's IRS speakers were revolutionary. But one piece of equipment, not even a Nordos cable, no. Okay, guys, listen, go upstairs with me to the Holt Memoriam that B's having. The drinks will be free. And Luke will have to sell more VTLs.
A lot more.
A lot, yeah, the big ones. Thank you so much, guys, for coming in. I appreciate it.